Cluny III is actually a monastic church. It belongs to the Clunics. They were one of many reform groups that we see in the church. The problem that they run into in the church is these monastic orders, for example, the Benedictines or the Dominicans or others. They would inherit a lot of land and therefore a lot of wealth. Why? Because people who were very, very powerful, rulers, for example, got there by killing a lot of people, by winning battles, which ended up killing people, by doing things that might be sinful. And so what people would do is often give their land, give their money, give everything they had to the church upon their death, hoping that that would help them gain entrance into heaven. And the Clunics are one of these reform groups who invariably these groups become powerful and become the thing they're trying to reform. But they would wear white. And what they would do is they would try and fix the system in a lot of ways. The Clunics were a very powerful order in the Middle Ages and controlled much of the pilgrimage route. In 910, Cluny Monastery would be founded and followed the rules established by Saint Benedict in the 6th century, known as the Benedictine rule, the rules for how to live as a monk. Eventually, the Clunics had to answer to the Pope. So in the 11th century, they begin founding new houses. What would happen is they would develop as a group. They would develop their own monastery, but eventually they have too many people at that monastery. So they would sit there and go, okay, 20 of you are going to go off and set up a new monastery somewhere else. That would become a daughter house. And that daughter house always owed allegiance, but also frequently money and resources to the mother house. It's a very interesting setup. So they owe their allegiance, these daughter houses, would owe their allegiance to the chief monastery at Cluny III. The order eventually became known for its spectacle, its art, music, and liturgy, and would become exactly what they were trying to reform. Now, the main monastery that they create is at Cluny, and this is Cluny III, much of which is going to be destroyed during the French Revolution. What we do have is one transept arm. This is the south transept arm, which is all that survives from the original church. But this is what the church would have looked like originally. And for a while, it was actually the largest church in Europe. It was started by Abbot Hugo and begun in 1088, consecrated in 1130. So it takes about 40 years to build. This is much faster than what we will see in the Gothic, where frequently churches will take 100 to 150 years to build. And legend says that one of the monks had a dream that Peter and Paul said that he must build an enormous basilica, and the saints laid out their plan to the monk, and in the morning he reported this to Hugh, the abbot, who said, well, if it's the plan of God, then we should use it. What may have actually happened? Well, someone had a plan, they couldn't get it through, or they didn't think they would get it through via traditional means, and so what they do is basically come up with a dream about it. Although if you're constantly focused on one structure and how it should look, having a dream about it wouldn't be that unusual. And given the language and the ideas of the time, the idea that saints gave it to you, well, that would work. So when we look at the structure itself, look at the plan, first of all, the nave is massive. It's 550 feet long, going from the entrance here and the narthex all the way down into the church itself. That's nearly 2 football fields. So we're talking about a massive, massive space. The transept is 119 feet long. It's, again, massive. And they actually have a double transept. So we have one here and one here, basically creating a double cross form. We have a structure that is 98 feet tall. Now, put yourself in people's shoes for a moment. We're in the 11th century, 11th, 12th century. And most structures that you were used to, your home, etc., are going to be 6-7 feet tall inside. To see something that's 100 feet tall inside, nearly 8-9 stories tall, is going to be miraculous. You don't need to believe in God when you see a miracle on earth every time you go into this church. And that's really what they're doing with a lot of these structures. They're creating a miracle. It's a remarkable sort of thing. We have a top with 6 different towers laid out. So we have a steeple, which is right over the crossing. Over each transept, we would have a tower. The second crossing also has a tower right over it. So that would be right here. And then we have the bell towers, which are up at the front. The steeples act like, well, for lack of a better term, a prayer antenna. The larger the steeple, the closer your prayers get to God, and the more likely they are to get there. In terms of elevation, so when we cut the structure down the center and we look at its parts, what we see is a 3-part elevation where we have the clerestory. Let me bring up my pen. So we have our clerestory here. That's the windows that bring the light in. We have a triform, which here is not a gallery. It looks like a gallery, but its actual purpose is to give a little bit more space on that wall to allow for the buttress that is outside of it. And then we will see an arcade that's being built. So in this case, this is what it looks like at Cluny III. And let me point out that the reason you need these levels, so we have an aisle, a larger aisle and a smaller aisle, is to bring the weight down. So we have weight from this giant stone barrel vault roof that wants to go down this way. But that also makes this wall want to collapse because it wants to go that way, right? Because the forces are going that way. What they do is they add these aisles, and that allows the forces to be drawn down, if I bring my pen back up, drawn down to the ground at an angle, which makes the church more stable. And it actually runs down into these piers that you see out here on the outer wall and eventually passes into the ground. The more that I can make this horizontal, this line here, bringing the weight of the roof into the ground, the more stable the building will be, the higher I can build it. And that's really what we're seeing at Cluny III. So we see incredible structures. We see no aisle that moves through the transept. So the aisles end with the nave. And we see no principal relic, which makes sense because it's not actually a site, a pilgrimage site. This is a monastery. This is where the monks will be staying. And it's a show of their wealth. For a reform group, they are putting all of that money into a church. Again, the largest church in Europe at the time.